Well, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate your time. Exciting to sit down with you. You were recently sworn in as a U.S. Attorney for Southern District of Iowa. So tell me just kind of how things have been since that swearing in.
Thank you, Dana. It's been a very exciting time. I appreciate your time this morning. I want to begin by thanking President Trump for his support, as well as Senators Grassley and Ernst for their support throughout the nomination and confirmation process. I also, as I mentioned to you off camera, the press plays such an important, vital role, and I'm so grateful for your time today. We want to ensure that there's transparency, that the public is aware and educated about our criminal justice system, but also by having these conversations, we're going to further the philosophical justifications of punishment, which is what I actually studied in graduate school, specifically deterrence, general and specific deterrence. So deterring individuals from committing crimes, but also educating the general public that these types of crimes are being investigated and prosecuted, and so that we protect our communities. And also, thirdly, we want to ensure that our victims and witnesses come forward and are willing to testify.
And we'll get into a lot of your top priorities in this role, but I want to start off by just asking you about your career, how you got to this point. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up, born and raised in Davenport, fifth generation Iowa lawyer, so this is where I'm born and raised, love Iowa. Went to undergrad at George Washington University in DC, studied political science, was very interested in political thought, eventually went to Oxford for my junior year, where I studied ancient political thought, specifically Cicero, Plato, Aristotle. Was very interested in pursuing those studies further. Went to Cambridge, where I pursued a master's degree in political thought and intellectual history, focusing on conservative tenets, so conservative philosophy from Edmund Burke, the early Federalists, to mid-20th century conservatives like Russell Kirk, and the philosophical justifications of punishment, which I thought was a great precursor to law school. I then went to UCLA for law school. Had a great overview in terms of experiences. I kind of had the full legal spectrum of clerking for two federal judges at the district court level, Judge John Jarvie and then Judge Mark Bennett, and then also clerked at the 8th Circuit for Judge Michael Malloy. And then knew it was my dream because I had interned at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., Iowa, and then externed at the U.S. Attorney's Office in California to be a federal prosecutor. I think it is the best job you can have as a lawyer and public servant. You get to pursue truth and justice, wear the white hat, advocate on behalf of victims, and stand up in court every day and say David Waterman on behalf of the United States. And to me, there's no greater honor than that. And so I applied everywhere. I eventually got an offer to be a federal prosecutor in the Middle District of Florida, which is the second largest district in the country. There's 11.5 million Floridians there. Started in the appellate division, and actually my first day was the day after the Pulse nightclub shooting, which was June 13th of 2016. 47 individuals were killed there. Really brought a lot of abstract issues like justice and advocating on behalf of victims to light. My first appellate case that I handled was uniquely Floridian in the sense that the defendants learned that they had a sinkhole beneath their home, and they contacted their insurance carrier, and the insurance carrier said, well, we can either pay you for the sinkhole or we'll take care of it. They said, well, pay us and we'll remediate it. Well, they paid them over $150,000. And instead of remediating the sinkhole, they made cosmetic repairs to the outside and then sold it to innocent home buyers who stayed in the new home, or they thought, it didn't have any issues. And then in the middle of the night, they heard what sounded like a car crash, and it was the sinkhole opening up. That was the first appeal I handled. We ended up getting affirmances on that. I then switched to the violent crimes and narcotics section for about 2 years, focusing on drug conspiracy cases. In particular, I handled a Title III wiretap investigation where we went after a gang out of St. Petersburg called 8 Hype, and all 11 defendants ended up pleading guilty and were sentenced to significant terms of imprisonment. And that was kind of my introduction to being a federal prosecutor, and had an absolute blast. COVID happened. I found as though it was the right time to return. We weren't going to grand jury, we weren't going to court, and then had the unique opportunity to practice with my father here, Bob Waterman, who was a president of the Iowa State Bar Association, and also got to learn from my uncle, Justice Tom Waterman, who's on Iowa Supreme Court, and several other mentors at Lane & Waterman, including Jeff Lang, who was a former United States Attorney for the Central District of Illinois, and other great trial lawyers at Lane & Waterman, Abby Furlong, Ian Russell, Mickey Schultz, Ben Patterson, all of whom were fantastic mentors and who I'm grateful for.
You have a lot of people in the Waterman line that you're lining up there.
Yes.
How have they all kind of contributed to, you being in this role now, and how is their support going to just kind of help you through it going forward?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I'm grateful for my family, and growing up around lawyers was unique. I think it was a wonderful experience. It also really, in my mind, instilled respect for our court system and our institutions, and it really brought to the forefront, too, for me, the importance of preparation and grit and civility for opposing counsel. I think that's one thing that's very unique about Iowa, is practicing here is unlike practicing in other jurisdictions. There can oftentimes be a lot of litigious discovery practices, and I witnessed that in California and DC and Florida. That's really not the case here. Your word is your bond. I think Iowa is a wonderful place to practice law. As to other things that I think they instilled in me, the art of storytelling. Growing up around trial lawyers, it was always fun to hear stories about trials that they had at holiday gatherings. As to the history of the family, you mentioned my great-great-grandfather was Justice Charles M. Waterman, who served on the Iowa Supreme Court from 1898 to 1902. And then so in each generation there's been lawyers in the family. I didn't know this until actually expressing an interest in becoming United States Attorney, but and this is a unique historical fact, but Justice Charles M. Waterman practiced with Joe R. Lane, who was a congressman in the United States Congress. His father, James T. Lane, was appointed to be the United States Attorney by President Ulysses S. Grant, who was the 18th United States President and was the last United States Attorney to serve for the entire state of Iowa before it was divided into two. And he was appointed in 1873.
Wow, that's crazy, the connection to all of that. That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So you have a lot of different experiences. You listed off a lot of different roles that you've played, cases you've investigated and prosecuted. But tell me, coming here to Iowa, what are some of your top priorities that you want to bring to the Southern District of Iowa?
Great question. There's a couple different things that guide our office. First, it's guidance from the Department of Justice. Operation Take Back America was a memorandum that was issued by the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche last year. And he and Attorney General Pam Bondi have been doing a fantastic job as leaders of the office. But also we have to confront what is unique about our jurisdiction and what are we confronting here in the district. I've got the statistics in my pocket, but off the top of my head, I can note that from January of 2025 to this year, January 2026, we charged 107 narcotics cases, 75 violent crime gang cases, and 47 child pornography exploitation cases. And we are consistently leaders in those areas. And so what do I mean by that? So when it comes to drug overdoses, we have charged consistently at the high end. There's 94 federal districts, 93 United States attorneys offices, in part because of Guam and Mariana Islands. But the reason why that's interesting, why we're number 2 when it comes to prosecuting overdose cases, is number 1 is actually where I started as an AUSA, the Middle District of Florida. And they have 11.5 million Floridians, but Iowa only has 1.8 million Iowans. So there's a big disparity in differences, and yet we're still prosecuting at those higher rates. And I attribute that to our law enforcement partners using their resources well, and also I think we're in a difficult situation because we're along the corridor of I-80, I-35. So we have a lot of drug trafficking that comes through the state. Recent case was Warren Narani, where we prosecuted 2 individuals where they had distributed 60,000 fentanyl pills into the Southern District of Iowa, resulting in overdose deaths. And that continues to be a real problem because fentanyl is the leading cause of overdose deaths in the country. As to the other crimes I had mentioned, human trafficking, we've been top 5. That's according to recent federal human trafficking reports. And human trafficking includes, and this can be uncomfortable to discuss, but it's important to bring to the public's attention, child exploitation. So child sexual exploitation, adult sexual exploitation, including through fraud and coercion, and also labor trafficking. And so we've been in the top 5 there. 2 cases that are worth noting would be Markley. That was a nurse practitioner out of Ames, Iowa, and I'm sure you've heard about it recently. It was affirmed on appeal yesterday by the 8th Circuit, his life sentence for being involved in child sex trafficking. There was also the case of Woods out of Davenport, where an individual had fostered and adopted children and then was reaching out via online technology to other pedophiles and individuals across the Midwest, and was then videotaping that abuse. Horrific facts, one of the worst I've seen as a federal prosecutor, and he ultimately was sentenced to 100 years in prison. Finally, after we talked about drug cases, human trafficking, violent crimes, that's going to be a priority, will continue to be one of this administration as well as our office. We've had successes recently in Davenport, which include the Fifth Street gang prosecutions that resulted in 3 different jury trials. All 14 defendants were found guilty, and results in significant sentences, that is for RICO-related crimes, federal firearms crimes, and also drug trafficking. And similarly, we prosecuted the OMB gang here in Des Moines, and what it was shown from the empirical evidence after those prosecutions, there were significant drops in the crime and the violence that was taking place. Reductions in shootings, reductions in murders. So we had a real impact on the community, and that's the ultimate goal. Although I haven't emphasized it as being the top 3, you know, there's also the white collar cases that we will continue to prosecute and spend resources on. We've seen an uptick, unfortunately, in these romantic scams across the Southern District of Iowa, as well as COVID relief scams and targeting vulnerable victims like the elderly. And so those will continue to be an emphasis of ours as well.
And you credited a lot of these uncoverings to partnerships with local law enforcement and the work that they're doing there. So in your role, how do you plan to continue to create those relationships and build those relationships from your local law enforcement, your county officials, all the way up to your role as U.S. Attorney? How do you plan to kind of just create those bridges and form those relationships to continue uncovering these investigations and prosecuting these cases?
So that's one of my key goals as the United States Attorney. In fact, if we were to talk about, you know, the 3 things that I want to do during my tenure, one in particular is ensuring that we continue to strengthen those partnerships. That is, you know, since I began on October 15th of last year, I've been meeting routinely with our federal agencies. That includes FBI, DEA, ATF, HSI, ICE, but then also our state and local law enforcement officers as well. And we have really good relationships. I'm in contact with Iowa's Attorney General Brenna Bird, who is also a fantastic leader and has been doing incredible things in her role. Looking forward to continuing to collaborate and coordinate with our law enforcement officials as we continue to investigate and go after certain crimes in the state that are impacting directly the safety of our citizens.
And I know, obviously, we're sitting here meeting today. You're meeting with local media. So why is it important for you to meet with local media, meet with the press, and have this transparency?
Yeah, and a great point. And that's part of what I raised kind of at the beginning of the interview. I think it's so important for the transparency of what we do so that the public is educated about the criminal justice system. But I also really think it furthers these philosophical justifications of punishment that I mentioned. So deterrence, not only deterring the specific individual who committed the crime, but general deterrence, so the public knows these crimes are going to be investigated and they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And so that hopefully deters people from committing them in the future. But also retribution and denunciation, the other philosophical justifications behind punishment. And I would note again, as I mentioned at the onset, we want victims and witnesses to come forward. If there are crimes that are being committed and you're aware of it, bring it to your local law enforcement or federal law enforcement's attention so that they can be investigated and prosecuted and brought to justice.
And what are parts of the federal justice system that Iowans maybe don't know about or don't realize when it comes to the process and behind the scenes?
Great question, and that's something that one thing we routinely see is a confusion about, well, why is that going to go federal versus state? Why is the United States Attorney's Office taking that case, but the Iowa Attorney General's Office or the local county attorney's office is taking that state? And it really depends on a variety of different factors. First and foremost, we collaborate routinely with those different prosecutors' offices to decide which office is the best one to investigate and prosecute a case to ensure that a just result is met. But there are other factors to take into account. Generally, if there's an interstate nexus, so it's traveled across lines, say there's drug trafficking involved from Illinois to Iowa, that would be under our purview. Or if there were interstate wires involved, such as a wire fraud conspiracy, that would be our purview as well. That would be something that would fall under the federal prosecutor's office. Also, if there's national or international interests that are at stake, that too would be something that we'd be interested in. And there are certain resources that our federal partners have that we use in certain types of sophisticated, complex drug trafficking cases and other cases that are useful. Specifically, FBI, as I mentioned, DEA, HSI, ATF, ICE, that some of the state, local agencies may not have, or such as Title III, for example, wiretaps.
And then I want to ask a little bit more about your stance when it comes to immigration enforcement. I know you've mentioned your collaboration with ICE. It's obviously something a lot of eyes are on right now, considering we're so close to Minnesota and Minneapolis and everything happening up there. And Iowa has its own fair share of immigration-related cases. So what exactly is your stance on immigration enforcement from the federal level and your role in this? And how do you kind of approach this topic in this role, considering it does have a lot of eyes on it and just a lot of traction right now?
Although I can't comment specifically on cases, immigration cases in particular, or predict what's going to happen in the future as it relates to immigration surges in the Southern District of Iowa, I can note that we benefit from a wonderful relationship between our federal, state, and local law enforcement officers. And I don't foresee the same issues arising here as have occurred in other jurisdictions. It's also worth noting that Iowa law enforcement needs to abide by and honors federal detainers, or they risk losing state funding. And also, as I mentioned, I don't foresee us coming across the same types of circumstances that have happened in other jurisdictions, given our wonderful working relationship among our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners.
How do you build that trust with the community to assure that something like what happened in Minnesota isn't going to happen here?
Great question. Part of that is this. I think getting out in the press, ensuring that there is more public trust by explaining the investigations and how they're grounded in the facts and the law is important, so that the community sees what we do and how our criminal justice system operates. Again, I think our office has done a fantastic job of doing that, and you can see principles that exist from one administration to the next. Priorities may change. One thing that I think's hopefully demonstrative of the fact that I was nominated by two presidents, President Biden and President Trump, is that this role is not political. I am not a politician. I enforce the law. I'm the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the Southern District of Iowa. My goal is to pursue justice and truth and enforce the law and ensure that our communities are safe and advocate on behalf of victims. Although priorities change, there are certain things that remain the same at the Department of Justice, such as our mission statement. Our mission is to uphold the rule of law, keep our communities safe, and to protect civil rights. But there's also principles and traditions that exist at the department that have remained, such as doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. And I believe that those traditions and principles will continue from one administration to the next, and I'm hopeful that the public sees that and has trust in our institutions and administrations, because really this is all our democracy, this republic, is based on that important belief in our systems of justice and having a balance of powers with our various, Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 of our Constitution. And that's why I think it's so important that we have more interactions with the press, so that they are educated about these processes and how we go about investigating and trying cases.
And you mentioned it there. That was going to lead into my next question. Is you have support. You're originally nominated by President Biden, and then also nominated and kept on by President Trump. So how do you plan to bring, that bipartisan mindset? I guess, if I know it's not a political role, but how do you plan to bring that bipartisan mindset to this role in office?
And I hope I've done it already. And I think by not only having the bipartisan support, but also having had experiences both as a criminal defense lawyer in private practice, Dana Waterman, but also as a former federal prosecutor and federal law clerk, I think I have a balanced approach to the law, one that emphasizes fairness, looks at it from a variety of different perspectives. And as I mentioned, this role really is not political. And I can say it again, I am not a politician. I am an attorney and most interested in advocating on behalf of victims, pursuing justice. And I'm hopeful that the bipartisan support is reflective of the fact that both parties saw my experiences as a federal prosecutor and a federal clerk and as a private practitioner to be directly applicable to my role now. I think this is really again, for me, as I mentioned earlier on, a dream position for me. And I think it really brings together all of my various experiences that I've had to date.
And I want to go back real quick and ask about a few other questions about Iowa statistics in terms of the opioid crisis and drug trafficking and how it ranks number 2, I think is the exact number you said,
Yep.
behind Florida, which was the district you were in previously. So for Iowans who hear that and maybe, raise alarm to hearing that statistic, I mean, how can you ensure to them that you are going to address this, and kind of what does that look like from your perspective?
Well, and I think the statistics bear that out. And in particular, we had 53 cases that we brought 52. Florida had 73. And we were ranked second, they were ranked first. And those statistics demonstrate that we are really emphasizing and putting our resources to these specific types of cases and prosecuting them to the fullest extent. I mean, two examples in addition to Warren Irani I had mentioned that brought in 60,000 fentanyl pills into the Southern District of Iowa. There was also Andrews, which was a case involving a woman defendant who was distributing fentanyl, resulted in an overdose death, and she was located at a gas parking lot, slumped over her steering wheel, passed out. So again, I would just reiterate that we realize the significant safety concerns that are confronting our community as a result of fentanyl and this crisis. It's a weapon of mass destruction, as the current administration has noted, and we will continue to put resources there to ensure and safeguard our community against this, as I mentioned, weapon of mass destruction.
What am I not asking you about that you wanted to touch on, or a message that you want to send to Iowans going forward?
I would just note and reiterate that our office takes our job very seriously, and that we will continue to pursue justice and truth and advocate on behalf of victims, and that we are here and open for business, looking forward to working with our federal, state, and local law enforcement officers to keep our communities safe. And I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to, again, continuing this dialogue with the media, because I think it is so important for transparency, but I also think it's so important for educating our public and furthering those philosophical justifications of punishment.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dana.